UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military black projects, false flag alien invasion psyop, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join UFO historian Don Ecker, MUFON State Director for New York Chris DePerno, retired veteran pilot Commander Cobra, and well-esteemed host and researcher Martin Willis as they discuss the latest news and topics regarding UAPs with a no-holds-barred approach on UAP-Crossfire.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to a brand new edition of UAP-Crossfire right here on KGRAdb, your entry point to some fascinating topics. And tonight, we're going to be taking a look at a very tragic figure in the field of UFO research going back 60 years. But first, I've got to say that our panel member, Chris DePerno, because of some family considerations, will not be here tonight. But with that being said, of course, we have Mr. Martin Willis. Martin,
hello.
Greetings.
Greetings.
And Commander Cobra. Commander,
Hello.
Greetings.
Greetings to you all.
And tonight's topic, Dr. James E. McDonald. Now, Dr. McDonald was a thorn, major thorn, like the size of a 10-penny spike in the side of government secrecy and concealment, going back to the mid-'60s. First, a little bit about Dr. James McDonald, a legendary name, no matter how you cut it or slice and dice it. During the Second World War, Dr. McDonald was a cryptographer in the United States Navy. And I think it's safe to assume that the cryptographers in many ways saved the United States of America. It gave us an entryway into such things as just 6 months after the sneak attack by Japan on the port and the anchorage of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, where a vast chunk of our Pacific fleet was either destroyed or put out of action. Within 6 months, the United States was able to conduct one of the most devastating attacks on the Japanese at the Battle of Midway, sinking in just a couple of hours 4 aircraft carriers of the Japanese. They were at that point trying to attack Midway Island, which would have given them a solid entry point into both Hawaii, where Pearl Harbor was, and the west coast of the United States. But yet, we were able to decrypt and decipher the Japanese naval codes, and we had an idea of where they were going to be, and we got there first. Now, some of that, I am sure, can be laid at the doorstep of Dr. McDonald. Later on, he became an atmospheric physicist and a proponent because he had been reading reports of UFOs. He had no firm conclusions on what the heck they were, but he believed fervently that they needed to be studied in an academic situation. Originally, he was allowed into the Air Force's Blue Book files. Remember, when this UFO phenomenon, this conundrum first began, the Air Force, which was literally created within just a couple of weeks of what had been the Roswell event, whatever that event was, took over because they were, of course, guarding our skies. But McDonald came to the firm conclusion that they were mishandling reports, were not going and utilizing a scientific type of analysis on these, and he became a vocal critic. Well, he really made his public presentation on October the 5th, 1966. He gave a lecture before the American Meteorological Society titled The Problem of UFOs. He said that scientific scrutiny should be directed toward the small number of unknowns, not the ones that had already been identified, but the ones that refused identification, which he defined as UFOs being reported by credible and trained observers. Okay. And there were people that absolutely did not like that. But I don't want to get ahead of myself too far, because we've got Commander Cobra, we've got Mr. Martin Willis. Gentlemen, do you have any thoughts before we really jump into this? Martin, do you?
Are you talking about thoughts on James McDonald?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Well, I think it's wonderful that they preserved his papers. I believe it's at the University of Arizona.
Yes.
Yeah. And I've talked to Dave, Marler. It took me a second, Dave Marler, about that, that archive. His Dave Marler's archive is going to be preserved in the same way with the university, which I think is wonderful, because they are, they're climate controlled, and everything is, archive materials and well cared for. And I think he did so much important research that that can move forward. I know that in his he died, a long time ago, 1970. Unfortunately, suffered from depression. I know, I read about that, and they didn't have the tools that they have today. If you have a chemical imbalance today, they have medication that works really well for a lot of people. And I know, people that suffered back then, a lot of times they just ended up taking their own life. They just couldn't live with the way they were feeling any longer. The old saying about, you're in a burning building, should you jump out or stay in it? That type of thing. That's how they often feel. And it was too bad, because we lost an icon, someone that was looking at this in a scientific way and very balanced. And there's a statement in his scientific presentation in 1969 where Jerome Clark, who I highly respect, said it was one of the best talks that he had ever heard, as far as addressing the scientific situation.
Commander?
Well, I've looked forward to this, and I thank the audience for tuning in tonight. I know we've had numerous weeks of fits and starts and stops. Dr. McDonald, a very learned and respectable person in any endeavor that he seems to have attached himself to. It seems that, to me, that his vulnerabilities, that whatever they were on the spectrum, were exploited. It has every look that he drove truth to the point that it was going to embarrass or unseat something that was not going to be easily done. And I find it sad for his loss. I was in prep for the show over the last couple of weeks. I was reading what's available, and I found that the paper that he did delivered, I believe, at Princeton, if my notes here, I think it was Princeton, Science and Default, is probably one of the most interesting ones in there. And what I was drawn to in that particular paper, fairly quickly, he doesn't go down conspiracy. His grind is that there's a scientific method, there's a scientific approach on how we should do this work. And as you said, Don, on the start of this, the qualified observers, which it wasn't a very high bar that was set, but people that had some connection to their professional background or position should be folks that that should be a really good starting point. So often he talks about people that worked in air traffic control or in security, aviators, civil and military, people that were connected to it, engineering part of it. So his loss and what to me seems to be rather murky circumstances, I find very disturbing on it. The body of his work that remains is pretty amazing, and anyone who is interested in his scientific applications outside of the scientific approach he did to UFO work, incredible work he did in atmospheric physics. When meteorology, before it really split to what it is now, atmospheric physics was a major endeavor, and there's still some people out there that actually pursue it, the quote unquote studying the weather, the sky, from that application. So strong credentials. Do we have a situation where he has PTSD that we see now, that we talk about now, that we never talked about with World War II vets? Was that part of it? Or was that a vulnerability that dark forces, which I have no doubt in my mind, would be more than willing to be involved to either discredit him or drive him to the point, sadly, of him taking his life?
Well, I've got some information about Dr. McDonald. Some of it I hesitate to display here before the world because it was some very private things affecting McDonald and his home life and family. But McDonald was definitely targeted, which we're going to be exploring in some detail a little bit later. But let me just say this. One of the reasons, and I was the one that originally came up with this idea about doing a show on James McDonald, was quite frankly, there were many similarities between that time period, 66 through 69, and today. And what those similarities were at that time, in 1966, at the Hillsdale College in Michigan, there were a series of extraordinary UFO sightings that made national news. Okay. Now, at that time, Project Blue Book was the Air Force's answer to the UFO conundrum. Now, I got to tell you up front, I think you gentlemen will probably agree with me, maybe not, but I think you will, that Blue Book was never anything more than a public whitewash. Okay. I've talked to many people over the last several decades. One of them was now retired Lieutenant Colonel Kevin Randall, who made an extensive examination of the Blue Book files. Now, Randall is one of the people in this field that know where many of the bodies are buried and where the bones are stored in regards to things like Blue Book. And we've had conversations about this on more than one occasion. But with that being said, Blue Book was tasked to respond to these sightings at the Hillsdale College. So what did they do? They trotted out their civilian astronomer consultant, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Now, lest anybody have any illusions about Hynek, Hynek, during his tenure as a consultant with the Air Force, was nothing more than a meat puppet with strings, okay? He followed the company line. He may not have agreed with it. And later, after he left the Air Force, Project Blue Book, he was much more vocal about his considerations about things that happened over the years. But Hynek made a gaffe in examining these sightings that reverberated throughout the United States, turning, Hynek and Project Blue Book by default into a major laughingstock. Now, these sightings happened in March 1966 in Michigan, and he went up there, and some of those sightings of whatever this was were extensive, including being made by uniformed police officers, all right? And Hynek went up there and began examining the evidence, etc. And finally, he said something that basically haunted him until the day he shed his mortal coil. He said, well, one possible thing that could have caused some of these lights was a phenomenon called swamp gas, which is basically vegetation, emitting light after it begins to decay. It's in a swamp area and what have you. Well, my God, this was in March, all right? It's very unlikely at the beginning of March in the state of Michigan that swamp gas could even conceivably be an answer. But newspapers all across the United States picked that up and turned it into a major, major laugh fest. Now, with that being said, these were the type of things that McDonald railed against. And I know from several people that I've talked to that knew both McDonald and Hynek. And I got to tell you up front, I've never met either of those men. So I have no firsthand experience with them. But Hynek was always described as being very diffident, And McDonald, in a very polite but stern way, chewed on Hynek's backside. Hynek did not like that. But with things like that and McDonald going public, he created a lot of problems. Now, in 67, 68, McDonald had been contracted by the Navy to go down to Australia to conduct some type of scientific inquiry down there. But while he was down there, of course, his reputation as an academic that studied the UFO phenomenon was well known. He ended up going on a number of television and radio programs talking about his research. Now, in the United States at that time, there were two primary, and I have to say this up front, vicious to the bone skeptics. One of them was a guy by the name of Donald Menzel from Harvard University, And I got to tell you, he was, in my opinion, a vicious son of a bitch. The other guy was a guy that I knew very well. As a matter of fact, I saved this guy personally from being pummeled by a drunk at Pensacola MUFON in 1990, Philip J. Klass. Now, Klass did something, and I later found out he had a reputation for this, because one of the people he tried it on was Stanton J. Friedman. Klass sent a series of letters to the United States Navy accusing McDonald of fraudulently using their money to go down to Australia to conduct UFO research, not what he was originally contracted for, which caused McDonald no amount of untold problems. This was something that was despicable, okay? And I didn't know that until many years later. But when I discovered that, by that time, I had already cut any association with Class after he blew up on me on my radio program in January of 1995, screaming, bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. Philip J. Class, okay? But this was the type of guy, all right, Class was, and Menzel was. Gentlemen, do you have anything to fill in there? Mark?
Hang on just a second. Yeah, I know Menzel. I have heard of him a lot over the years as one of these skeptics, and of course, Philip Glass had quite a reputation, and that's funny that you saved him. That's good. I mean, he didn't need to get socked, but still, the fact is that from what I never understood about any of that, and then today we have our contemporaries that are kind of filling the void there, if you want to call it a void. But he seemed to have funds. He seemed to have money behind him. And I just wonder, turning it back to you, if you knew exactly why. I mean, there is a story, I can't say it's true or not, that he offered Steve, and I can't think of his last name right now, from the Travis Walton incident.
Oh, yes.
$10,000 to say that it was all made up.
Yes.
And where would, was someone funding him? That's the question, because I know today the Skeptic Society is very lucrative. I mean, they have a lot of funds. It's nonprofit, but they have like $6 million in funds, or something like that.
Class, and I can recall this vividly, of course, for years, because my wife and I were publishing UFO magazine here in LA. We had contact with these guys all the time. And Class, whenever he would be asked, well, where's your money coming from, Phil? Now, let me say this initially. Class had been a senior editor at Aviation Week and Space Technology for years. Now, I have no idea what his salary was, but he was out there. He was in the industry. And he would make these remarks like, oh, yeah, the CIA pays me $10 million a year to do this. And, he would say things like that all the time. Of course, everybody was supposed to take it for a joke. But if you were to ask me, Ecker, do you think anybody was paying Phil? I honestly could not give you a straight answer, but I will say this. I have no doubt whatsoever that he was working on the behest of someone. One time I asked him, I said, Phil, I've got a question for you. I said, look, let's say for whatever reason you got angry that people acted like Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, was a real thing, all right? And for the last 40, 50 years, you went on a rampage denying that there was an Easter Bunny or Santa Claus. Why would you do that? The same thing with UFOs. Everybody knows that you're one of the biggest skeptics currently in the world today, and you've been saying since the 60s that UFOs are crazy talk. Why are you continuing on? And he really couldn't give me a coherent answer, but I will tell you one thing. In the early 90s, all right, at that period of time, there were two things that were really making the UFO world go fast. One of them was abductions. The other thing was missing fetuses, or the missing fetus syndrome. For the most part, women claiming that they were abductees, okay, and they were taken aboard craft, they were impregnated, and then within 3 months, okay, the first trimester, the aliens would come back and remove the viable fetus. All right? That was one thing. The other were abductions. Well, Class ended up writing a book about abductions. And he was the epitome of the armchair researcher. I discovered that during the process of his writing that book, he never once, not one time, did he ever interview anybody that was claiming to be an abductee. Now, you guys may be aware that during the Apollo moon program, there was a federal statute on the books that, and of course, later, the government, NASA, said, well, it was because of the moon program. We were afraid that they might bring back some type of infectious creature or something that we would have no immunity to. And that's why we did the things we did. But they had a statute on the books that if a civilian or a citizen came in contact with an extraterrestrial source, they could be grabbed, they could be placed in quarantine and prison without benefit of attorneys or anything else. As a matter of fact, that was part of the national security state in operation with that. Well, the reason I mention this is one time my friend, Dr. John Brandenburg, a physicist, Mars Authority, etc.,
Guest of our show.
Yes, was on a flight, okay, where Phil Klass was there. And he sat down next to Phil. And Brandenburg is a very jovial, friendly guy. You know, he loves everybody. And they were talking. And of course, the conversation turned to UFOs. And Brandenburg looked at Phil with a devilish glint in his eye. And he said, hey, by the way, he said, you know, I was exposed to an extraterrestrial source. And he said, what Klass did shocked him. He jumped back in his seat to get away from him. Okay. And Brandenburg started laughing. And then he said, oh, no, Phil, I'm just kidding. But
that's funny.
So anyway, Commander, do you have any thoughts?
Well, you put a lot in there to unpack. A disturbing trend when you talk about the national security apparatus harnessing on this, things that are on the books, things that aren't well understood. I find that very disturbing. Links back to your remark of 66 to 69, allusions to the times now that we're in, times then. What I find frustrating is if you're skeptical on this, that's fine. But you have to be able to explain your skepticism on there. And if you get to the point where you don't have anything but faith or a conclusion that you've drawn just based on what you've seen, then that's where you stand on it. And you go forward from there. There is something that drives this, though, that I find uncomfortable, that it's and not delving too far off the mark and trying to stand on Dr. McDonald. You can't, it seems that there was a great fear in anything that was not the pardon the expression, I'm putting it in air quotes, the party line. And the party line was, this was not what you think it is. And we can't even entertain discussion different than what the conclusion has been handed down. And when you look at that, and you look at someone who's a veteran, rigorous academic credentials. I mean, Dr. McDonald's studies were not in areas that were not rigorously demanding studies. He is honed in the method of approaching these kinds of problems and documenting your work, showing where you make conclusions, where you have conjecture, you're showing what you based it on, and it just flies in the face of it. And the thing that has always entertained me since you introduced me to this man, going back, if I remember correctly, probably a couple years ago when we first talked about him, is that he wanted to focus on what I think is the most interesting cases, the ones that don't have a lot of fluff, don't have a lot of other things around it. He was a person that was, look, we should really zero in on these that have a fairly high percentage of yielding something very interesting coming out of it. For the audience, it should be in the link. I haven't kept up with what Martin posts. Unfortunately, not able to talk direct. I can only read what you have in there. This is probably one of the most interesting papers that's online available. If people want to grab it, it doesn't cost anything. Just grab that website. Very, very interesting paper.
The link is in the chat.
Thank you. It's the vehement. It's the vehement fight on this that I find strange. Seems out of place, especially for the times that it occurred. What's driving that? Now, when you talk about Blue Book, there's so many interesting sub-stories around the Blue Project. It ranges from buffoonery to organized efforts to discredit or throw people off.
Deception.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to the deception point. And it's a piece that you look at using and harnessing before there was a social media, when people gathered at conventions, when people like yourself that were running periodicals to try to get in there coverage of what was going on. There's no doubt in my mind that has occurred. But again, it also provides cover to the cases that do not defy easy explanation and acceptance based on the most elementary ways to approach a phenomenon. Something has to be there that motivates that.
Well, one of the things that I was aiming to get to, talking about Hillsdale, the Hillsdale sightings, was that Michigan Congressman Gerald R. Ford, who later, well, this is a whole nother ball game, but he became president of the United States, okay, when Richard Milhouse Nixon resigned over Watergate, the Watergate scandal in 1974. Ford had replaced Nixon's vice president, okay, because he apparently was involved, Spiro Agnew, in criminal activities. Okay, Ford became president. But before all that happened, he got very interested in this whole UFO thing. Now, look, the Air Force was not happy about that. And they ended up having a one-day hearing on UFOs in Congress. Hey, sound like things we might be familiar with?
Something old, something new.
Yes, exactly. And to make a long story short, it was decided that there would be an academic examination. Now, the first trick the Air Force, okay, had to do was to find somebody to head it. Now, they started shopping around for universities and somebody to head this thing up. And they ended up enticing Edward Condon, okay, to head this project up academically. Now, who the hell was Edward Condon? Well, if you know anything about your history, okay, and hey, even Richard Nixon was involved in this. Go back to the early 50s. There was a great fear after the end of the Second World War. Our good buddies, the Soviet Union, under Uncle Joe Stalin, okay, suddenly weren't good buddies anymore. After the Russians absorbed over 26 million casualties because of the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union and the unimaginable death and destruction that happened on what today is called the Eastern Front, okay, they wanted their pound of flesh, the Russians, all right, the Soviets. So they ended up grabbing almost all of Eastern Europe, not to mention half of Germany. And suddenly, we were at odds with our former allies, the Soviets. Now, in the United States, okay, things began to leak out that during the Second World War, the Russian secret police, the NKVD, later the KGB, had infiltrated many, many areas of American society. For example, Hollywood, all right, had been chock full of either card-carrying or sympathizers of the communist cause. This scared a lot of people. And at that time, the president of the United States was Harry Truman. Now, Truman was Democratic, okay, was a Democratic president, but he was a hard-nosed guy, all right? It's doubtful the Democratic Party today would even recognize Harry Truman as being one of their own, but that's beside the point. And a series of hearings began to be held in Washington, D.C., called the House on Un-American Activities. Now, in 52, of course, Dwight Eisenhower, who had been the El Supremo commanding general of the Allied war effort in Europe, became president, all right? Truman was on his way out. Eisenhower was on his way in. Richard Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president. And Nixon, who was a fervent anti-communist, got involved in there. And one of the people he clashed with horribly was Edward Condon, who had some very left-wing sympathies. Now, this will prove to be very, very informative and interesting a little bit further down the road. So it's no doubt in my mind they hated and loathed each other. Nixon was notorious for keeping an enemies list. And I'm sure Condon would have been right in there near the top. So keep that in mind. So with that being said, okay, Gerald Ford pushed, got his hearing, then they pushed for an academic study. Edward Condon agreed to take it over. They finally found the University of Colorado, which was willing to accept it. All right, they had to have a university to do that. And the Air Force allocated just under $500,000 for this thing. Now, McDonald, of course, was very, very interested in this, being a scientist himself. He, however, was not part of the academic study at the university. But at that time, there were two well-regarded UFO civilian organizations called NICAP, the National Investigative Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, which was headed up by retired Marine Corps aviator and Major Donald Kehoe, and APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, headed up by husband and wife James and Coral Lorenzen. And those people are also very important in the overall history of UFOs. Gentlemen, Martin, do you have anything to contribute with this?
No, I'm following, where we're going with this. Not a lot. I mean, we all know what happened with the Condon Committee, and their conclusion basically shut
Not
down.
everybody. Not everybody.
That's true. Yeah, but they were very, very biased and didn't really. They were accused of that. I can't say I know for sure, but by everything I've read about it, they were very biased, and basically it seemed more or less like a tool to shut down Blue Book. I mean, these things have always seemed to arise when the topic gets too hot, and they want to pretend that they're not really looking, that type of thing. And I pulled up by accident actually on the screen just a little while ago about this Kona Blue thing. I heard everybody talking about it today. I don't know if either one of you looked into it, but it just is another ongoing thing here. And of course, we want to stay on topic here, but I'm not really sure if either one of you have looked into that. I have not. I'll be the first to admit it. I've just been too busy to.
I've heard it. I haven't really had a chance to look into it myself.
Yeah.
No, neither have I, Martin.
Yeah, but the two organizations were citing, they were both very solid and interesting, had some really good research, and I mean, it would be really something to dig through their archives. I know some of their archives are available.
Well, the reason I mentioned them is that they both jumped into the fray, offering the University of Colorado study all their files, everything. And APRO, Jim and Coral Lorenzen's group, really heavily gravitated toward academics, many PhDs that contributed to the APRO research. And of course, the same with NICAP. Now, Kehoe was a graduate of the Naval Academy at Annapolis, and many of his classmates at that time ended up later being flag rank officers. One of them was Hillenkotter, Admiral Hillenkotter, who was the first director of the Central Intelligence Agency, sat on the board of NICAP. Now, I've never really quite known what to make of that. They were classmates. They were personal friends, Kehoe and Hillenkotter. But might there have been a dual purpose in Hillenkotter being on that? Possibly. Because, hey, after the Second World War, we did not have, other than military intelligence personnel, we didn't really have a CIA type organization, with the exception of Bill Donovan's OSS, the Office of Strategic Services. And Donovan still kept his hand in, but when the CIA was created, suddenly we had an organization that, not that we couldn't before, but could go toe-to-toe with the Soviet KGB at that time. Commander Cobra, do you have any insight?
A couple things. I'll work back to the intel community in a second. You laid out the case around what happened with the Condon study, but I think it's interesting to just draw the obvious parallels when I looked at when Senator Reid was with us, and he was able to get funding to have a study look at UFOs. to the Stars Academy forming in there. So we repeat the process over many times. And I think the problem is if you don't have, and obviously I couldn't carry the book bag of either one of you on the history of this, looking back at the decades upon decades, but you start to see a cycle and a trend repeat itself over with slight variations in that. And the principal center of what we're talking with Dr. McDonald is there's been many folks that have literally lost their lives, if not their livelihoods and other parts involved in this when they seem to get too close to what could be truth or breaking some kind of barrier that's on this. In the chat, I'm sorry that I didn't catch the name. There was a question in there. Do you believe Nixon showed Jackie Gleason alien bodies on that?
Yeah, we talked. Didn't you talk about that, Don, a number of shows ago?
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
But I got a firsthand story.
All right, but hold on a second before you go to that one, because I want to just finish up. The intelligence community, the huge difference between the OSS and the CIA is that each military had and still maintains to some great deal an intelligence operation for obvious reasons. Generally to assess what possible enemy activity, and if you're in any kind of combat position, to figure out what their order of battle is so that you can properly align to defeat it. The OSS scared a lot of people because it was directly working for the executive branch, directly for the president. It had a free hand. It was allowed to operate where the members of the OSS could almost assume any rank or position within the military, use those resources, aircraft, ships, facilities. And then you had other government agencies, FBI, and the related that had built up an intelligence source as well. When the Central Intelligence Agency came in, this was that first attempt to try to combine a lot of research activities, analysis, which not everybody did a very good job with. Everybody was good at grabbing some intel, someone making a kind of a command decision, and then you would act upon that. Donovan showed that if you had the ability to step back, do some analysis, you were able to then, with very small amount of really manpower and input compared to what the results were, really change things. I think that taught a lot of people within the government this is a very useful tool. I think it's well known that Truman regretted almost immediately after the formation of the CIA because he no longer had that direct kind of link with it. The closest that you have with it is the president often is the one, is the only one, is assigns the director. But the bureaucracy built up, it went into directions, and of course, it's very difficult not to, with a straight face to say that there's obviously some blurring of the lines of missions on all these organizations. If you remember, approximately 20 years ago, they decided to have another capping to all the different intelligence agencies. You have the Defense Intelligence Agency, you have the National Reconnaissance Office, again, all working and trading in this world of intelligence. And then they brought a new director of intelligence on top of everything, trying to get control of that. And they've added to the layers on that. Layers are helpful if you're trying to keep people from being able to get too close to what you're doing. There's some very good reasons for that. You have people that are way down at the end, at what I like to refer to as the pointy end of the stick. And if they're unmasked or if they're shown to be what they're doing, their lives are in danger. How does that relate? And I often think that it relates to a lot of the activities in UFOs. I think that is something that definitely we have touched upon many times. So that was to answer your questions. Why don't we get back to a quick recap of President Nixon and Jackie Gleason, From Here to the Moon, Alice, and the
one of these days.
One of these days.
Well, Jackie Gleason had a very well-known fascination and interest in UFOs.
And an extensive
Going-
library collection of works on research.
Yes, he did. Going back to the early 50s. Now, in God, what year was it? It was after Gleason had passed, but I was one morning. This had to be in the mid 90s. I had been invited to come on a CNBC show in the early hours of the morning. I had to get up at 5:30. Oh my God, 5:30, and go over to the studios. I was there at 6, and then I think we were on the air. And I've got a photograph of me on the air, and if you could see it, you'd laugh. I looked like I was hungover. I wasn't, but I mean, at this early hour in the morning. And I did my shtick, but one of the other people there was Gleason's ex-wife. Okay. Now, Jackie had been married, I think, it doesn't really matter, but 3 or 4 times. And I was talking to this lady, and I forget now even who the heck she was, her name. But anyway, I had remembered this story. So I asked her about that. I said, I've heard this story. I knew that Jackie Gleason had a tremendous interest in UFOs. As a matter of fact, I had even heard some old Long John Neville interviews where Gleason had called in when they had a UFO topic on the show, talking about it. And I said, the story I heard was that he was a golfing buddy with Richard Nixon. And Nixon, at that time was president of the United States, knew about Gleason's interest and fascination. And one night, this car pulled up wherever Gleason was at in Miami, and Richard Nixon got out, went up, knocked on the door. Jackie came to the door, and he told him, "Get your jacket. Come on, we're going to take a little drive." No Secret Service or anything else. Now, I got to tell you, that part of it was hard to believe. Not that presidents, if they were really determined, couldn't slip the leash on their Secret Service detail. But if they did, somebody's ass was going to be in a ringer. Sure. You can bet on that. But Gleason went out, got in the car that Nixon was driving. They drove over to the air base. I'm not sure. I think it was Homestead. And the guard saw who it was, waved them in, and Nixon knew where to drive. They drove out to this building, kind of like on the outskirts, armed guards in front. This is the story. They went up, the guard opened the door. Nixon took Jackie Gleason inside, went into another room, a cold storage room, and then showed him alien bodies in some type of a freezer apparatus. Well, when I asked his ex-wife about that, she said, "Oh my God." She said, when Jackie came back to the mothership, now, incidentally, the mothership, that was the name of his house.
Martin.
Yeah.
I sent a picture, Martin, to you. If you
want it's right here.
Yeah.
When he got back to the mothership, she said, for the next 2 or 3 weeks, he bounced off the walls. He was so overwhelmed by this. He probably had PTSD, if this story is true. But anyway, so do I believe it? Well, from what the woman told me, I would have to say I'm on my way to believing it. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, it's for the audience. And before we run to break, I saw J. Paul had put in there that this is I'm using the word conspiracy. J. Paul didn't use it, but this is a a concerted effort to block the advancement of introducing new technologies, breakthroughs, either inspired or acquired or through development. And I completely agree with that. I think it's a great point. I think that this is why there's suppression of a lot of it going on, because the status quo and those that are kind of in on the good side of the status quo like the way things are going, like the order that they have, and they don't like breakouts like this because it upends technologies, it upends economies, and ultimately, which I have said and shared with you, all of you, all three of you, is that accountability might be recognized if people realize just how pervasive the depth of the cover-up and obfuscation of fact that has gone on for as long as it's gone on. And there may be even more dark sides to agreements or things that have been allowed. I think that.
Well, let's pick up on that, Commander, when we come back. We are at the top of the hour for break. Ladies and gentlemen, this is UAP-Crossfire with my panelists, Commander Cobra and Mr. Martin Willis. And unfortunately, Chris DiPerno couldn't make it tonight, but you do have me. And we'll be back after these words. Stick around. And we are back. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Let's continue on with Dr. James McDonald. Now, around 1970, 71, and it turned out that Commander Cobra, when we discussed this a number of weeks ago, set me straight. He was very aware of this. In around 70, 71, McDonald testified before Congress, not as you might think about UFOs, but about something completely different. If you weren't around then, it was an amazing technological feat. There were aircraft, the supersonic transport, the SST, that could fly from the United States, I guess the East Coast, to Europe, to Great Britain, in a matter of just about 3 hours or so.
2.5 to 3 hours. Yep.
And that was unprecedented. I mean, here was an aircraft that was so futuristic, so advanced, that it could just, boom, get there. Now, McDonald, being an atmospheric physicist, he started talking about something that most people had not even considered then. They didn't know enough to consider it. And this was also a time, and I recall this, that people began cautioning against women's hair products like hairspray. Why?
Ozone.
Because the ozone layer, they claimed, was being affected. And that's exactly what McDonald was telling Congress. Now, by this time, James McDonald had a great big red target on his back. And Commander Cobra, you're aware of the congressman that is, as it turned out, was in a district that were in the process of manufacturing pieces and parts and God knows what else for the SST aircraft. And of course, his main concern was how it would affect their business. And he basically said before Congress and the world and to McDonald, well, here's a guy that believes in flying saucers and little green men. Why should we regard anything he says as important? Commander?
Well, perfect tactic when you look at it. The congressman in question was a reprobate, as far as I'm concerned, in every definition of the word. But it's the perfect storm for McDonald when you look at this. He's obviously getting under people's skins in a lot of areas. But when he now gets onto this before really anyone was putting out academic papers, showing any kind of research, he's doing an analysis and comes out and says, look, we have a problem with the ozone, and the materials that we're using is having a negative effect. It's going to allow more ultraviolet rays in. And then, of course, a decade to 2 decades later, we were able to reverse the use of the materials, get the fluorocarbon no longer to be used. Ozone starts to repair, and the infamous hole that was in Antarctica, the atmosphere repairs itself as it's, however people want to look at it. It's how the system that the planet works on. It does heal if given the opportunity. But you look at that particular situation aside from that, and it works in multiple ways. If you're a reputable scientist, don't get on the wrong side of any issue because it'll be used against you in any opportunity. Let's ignore anything that you have on its merit because it's going to affect the bottom line decision that we have. And this is not the first time, and sadly, it will not be the last time that we will do as a race of beings on this planet, very stupid things that will endanger large numbers of people for whatever short-term gain of power, money, which is probably the both, or control, or whatever else is going on. And I won't even step off the line and go down the long list of craziness. I didn't wear a ball cap tonight, so no tinfoil is going to be showing. But this is what I've talked about endless.
Want to borrow mine?
On the Endless Show. I could never wear that hat. Are you kidding me? Heavy weighs the crown on you two. That's why I have no hat on tonight. Both of you. But this is interconnected. It ties up with it. If you do this kind of work and you show that, I think Major Kehoe had similar things that went after him for the work that he did. He had similar arrows shot at him that really hurt him. I think he was distanced in many of the areas. And the problem that people face with it is he was truthful how he approached it, the way he was presenting information. Once you got people's attention and got past that first layer, they started to go, well, it does kind of make some sense what they're saying. Let's at least listen to their argument on that. I think that's one of the most useful things that we learn that's going on today. Immediately, any kind of a dissenting voice, especially on this particular topic, is going to immediately bring a firestorm down on top of you. And you're going to have lots of people that are glad-handing it all around.
Martin, do you have any remarks to make on that with the ozone hearings?
Yeah. You say about the target on his back, and I don't believe there was anything suspicious about the way he died or anything like that. But however, that doesn't mean that he was not under a lot of pressure. And that's what I wonder if you know any of the details, Don, about did he suffer a lot of aggression from people that were trying to get him to turn away from the topic of what he was researching, including UFOs?
Well, he was very pointed at the conclusion of the Condon Committee report on UFOs. Look, even at the very end of it, and I had said that I was going to mention something more about Ed Condon and Richard Nixon. But before I go there, let's look at the times, okay? 67, 68. We are at the very height of the Vietnam War, okay? 100, 200 guys every week were coming home in aluminum coffins. The anti-war demonstrations were rearing up. Then, in 68, 2 murders, 2 assassinations happened that caused cities to burn and relations between the races devolved so fast it was unbelievable. In April, the beginning of April, Martin Luther King was murdered, was assassinated by the way, a Dixiecrat, okay, a Democrat, KKK guy, shot him with a sniper rifle. And in June, as a matter of fact, the night of my high school senior dance, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated here in Los Angeles by a Palestinian. Okay. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Now, I'll even go a little bit further with the Bobby Kennedy thing. My wife's uncle was Grant Cooper. Okay. Now, her dad, okay, and this guy, they were brothers, but I mean, Vicky didn't have hardly any contact with them. But the guy was, number one, a mob lawyer. he was a lawyer for Johnny Roselli, okay, his famous name from the mafioso. And when Sirhan was accused, and hey, look, for whatever it's worth, coming from me, and if you don't agree with me, well, so be it. I think the guy was programmed, all right? Sirhan, somebody did an MK Ultra trick on that son of a bitch, but he assassinated Bobby Kennedy in front of hundreds of people. And there are a lot of questions about that. But her uncle, Grant Cooper, the mob lawyer, ended up being one of his defense attorneys. So that's in full disclosure, all right? I wanted to get that out. But the cities across the United States started burning. Things in 68, the year I graduated, I got to tell you, man, nobody knew if we were going to get out of that year alive. In July, August, okay, the Republicans held their convention, okay, down in Miami, all right. Richard Nixon, who had tried to capture the presidency in 61, was defeated by John Kennedy, all right, made another stab at it. He got the nomination, and he ended up squaring off with Hubert Humphrey. Now, ultimately, Nixon won the presidency. January 69, now, he was the president. Now, Ed Condon saw that. And people, let's call it for the sake of a term everybody is going to recognize, people in this D.C. swamp at that time, probably involved with the intelligence services and the Air Force, saw this as very problematical because Nixon, knowing what kind of guy he was and somebody that wanted to get his paybacks with somebody, they were fearful that he would come in and tear this Condon Committee report to shreds, if for no other reason, to spite his political enemy, Edward Condon. So they rushed that conclusion of that report through. Now, a lot of people won't know this, but scientists all across the United States, both pro and con, looked at this report, and many of them were highly skeptical. What they didn't tell you up front, that was a quarter or more of the cases that they examined were totally unidentified. They didn't know what the hell they were. Okay? So, for the sake of argument, let's say 25% of these cases were unknowns. Now, that's a hell of a lot of unknowns. Were they all the classic UFOs? Probably not. but enough of them were that they should have never came to that conclusion. But the bottom line was the United States Air Force wanted to get Blue Book out of their hair. They were able to successfully close this down with the cessation of the Condon Committee report. Now, they got it done before Nixon got in, okay? So that was no longer a consideration. But there were a hell of a lot of people that were not happy. April was not happy. NICAP was not happy. James McDonald was very unhappy and accused them of using sloppy methods. As a matter of fact, one of the most famous incidents to come out of this was before they were really into this deeply. One of the inside scientists who wanted to have a very open and honest discussion about this discovered a memo written by a guy by the name of Robert J. Lowe. Now, Lowe was a PhD. What the hell do you call it in the university? He would take the brain, huh?
A provost?
No. He would take the people in the PhD program. He was like their advisor, scientific advisor, what have you. Okay. He wrote a memo to several scientists, okay, that were questioning why reputable men of science would affiliate themselves with something as outlandish as the idea of UFOs. Lowe wrote this memo, and he used the term "the trick would be." Okay, and if you just had the Condon Committee paper up, I'm sure they talk about that. The trick would be for everybody else to see a bunch of and I'm paraphrasing, skeptical scientists looking at this with almost zero ability to, think there's anything really here, but to everybody else will look like we're really doing our job. Now, later on, after this became known, this caused a couple of people to resign from the Condon Committee. People like Donald Kehoe and Coral Lorenzen suddenly pulled all their support from the Condon Committee. They had been feeding them cases and all kinds of information. They said, screw this, we're not playing anymore. You guys have shown you're not honest. That's it. And it created a big kerfluffle at the time. So, McDonald really lambasted into that. And this was, before the ozone hearings at Congress. But this guy now was marked. He was marked. Now, I said that I was privy to some information that is not public knowledge. I'm not going to disclose what that is, but I will tell you this, that he was having not only problems professionally and academically, he was having problems in the home. Now, something finally snapped in McDonald. And he got himself his pistol. He walked out into the desert. He was living in Arizona. And I guess he decided, I've had it, this is it. And he shot himself. The first time. Didn't kill him, obviously, but it did blind him. He was found, they took him to the hospital. Now the poor guy was blind, all right? Apparently things didn't get any better for him. So once again, after he was capable of and able to, he got himself another pistol. and he went out into the desert this time, and he got the job done.
Jeez.
And that was the end of James McDonald. Now,
Horrible.
out here in California, unfortunately, she's now no longer with us. A lady, a long-time lady,
Great
in the
one.
UFO field,
Yeah.
Ms. Van Truffel, okay, knew McDonald, wrote this book, okay, Firestorm. And if any of this stuff we're talking about tonight interests you,
This is the book.
I strongly suggest finding a copy of that book and reading it, because that'll give you a heck of a lot of information.
Jack Vallee's Ford is worth the price of admission just to get the hands on the book.
Yeah. So, gentlemen, Martin, do you have any comments, remarks, observation?
Well, first of all, I got to meet Ann's daughter, and she was very, very nice. I interviewed her and talked a bit about McDonald, but also that she has the original. Is it the Heflin photos? The Polaroids?
Yes.
Am I thinking? She has those in the safe, the originals, because they showed up again. I'm going off track.
No.
So about the Condon Committee and Project Blue Book, closing in 1969. I just bringing this up as kind of a side note here because I think it's really fascinating. I'm involved in this group down here in South Carolina where I'm spending a few months in a guitar strummers group. We strum guitars. There are some really good people. I'm not saying I'm good at it, but I enjoy it. It's fun. And working on a website, and I was talking to a guy that I'm working on a website with, and he said, "Oh yeah, UFOs. Yeah, I used to talk. I worked in the Department of Defense at Wright Pat, in Ohio, and I used to talk to the guys at the coffee bar about, UFOs. It was pretty interesting and all that. And I did a talk down here about that, about the UFO topic basically. And so, and I said, well, do you remember any details? And he said, well, I remember like the office closing around 1970, but there were still people talking about UFO. In other words, after Project Blue Book, people were still talking about UFOs. Now, I don't know if they had something quietly that they were doing. Most likely, I would imagine they probably did have something going on there, but I tried to get as much detail from them I could.
Again, history repeats itself, right?
Yeah.
Offices close. It ended in, fill in the date. And then 6-7 years later, you find out, well, this was the next organization that took over. We didn't exactly get the name out in the public. And then you find there's been another study that's been going on. But this is the one you can believe, because this news that we just put out, this is absolutely true blue. Everything is good on this one. And then Congress gets involved, and there's a whole bunch of people that are interested, and you hear an interesting thing comes out. You really need to believe this guy. This guy's lying. Now we have the whistleblower stuff going on. A whistleblower makes it, and then you have legions of people. But if you roll back to McDonald and the period around with Condon, you kind of see the blueprint, no pun intended, that was kind of etched out here to set up these kinds of activities that when it's useful for whatever reason it is to have the information come out, we're going to allow it. When it gets too close to something else, we're going to go to another situation. People capitalize on crises. They capitalize on situations. And ultimately, I think when you look at just the very simple sums here, the Condon report and what Dr. McDonald did shows a large, sizable part of a sample that was presented that is not explained, is not easily dismissed. So even when people went in with the attitude, this is all BS and we're going to prove it, they can't prove it. But their way of handling it is, well, let's just not even talk about that anymore. Focus on the part that the larger majority part that we gave an explanation on. And I think they learned from the swamp gas explanation. They floated a trial balloon there. and even in the tame times that was presented, people are going, no. So this cycle is going to repeat. The only thing that I think is changing is much what happened to our overall media. When newspapers were king, when newspapers and the syndication of writing in articles and papers was king, the internet completely upended that. It's upended how we handle things like social entertainment, social exchange. You have people now with near immediate, and I have to hand it to the government. I have to hand it to, when I say that, I'm talking about the entire world governments. They've learned pretty quick how to use that to their advantage. They've learned it pretty quick how to swamp. Look what we're arguing about TikTok, ultimately being controlled or aligned with the communist Chinese government as a tool for propaganda, as a tool for swaying opinion. It's age old, but now it's happening in a cycle that's much quicker. Yet, anytime it gets close, something else seems to drop, and that's what takes the attention. That's what takes over the cycle. What used to be called the news cycle now is what? Probably down to 5 to 10 minutes. I mean, look at how many times on the show when Bill has, he's checking the internet while he's monitored the show in the background. And he throws it in there. This just happened, and how quickly we react to that now. Yeah. Completely different. I just think that we have a small group that's behind, not really controlling it very well, but really shoveling in the rounds pretty quickly into this new media, new age that we live in. But we're still up to the same old tricks. And
well, I needed to mention something that McDonald was such a huge giant of a figure in this field. Now, during his investigations, he invariably recorded everything he did on a tape recorder, okay? I guess the old reel-to-reel type tape recorder. And he had literally hundreds of interviews that he made with some very big cases and some cases you've never heard of. Now, a friend of mine out here in California works in the entertainment industry, all right, sound and that type of thing, was asked if he would transfer all these things to digital, okay, from analog to digital. They gave him the material, he cleaned it up, and he made it. But here's the catch, okay? He had to send all of this back to the University of Arizona. They have all of this down there. They have not made it available for the public. But if you travel down to Arizona, to the university, you can make a scheduled visit. You got to schedule it. Tell them what you want to do. But you can go in there and you can examine some of his material. And I think, I got to tell you, gentlemen, I think that is a horrible, horrible waste of resources.
What do you think? What do you think is behind that, Doug? Why is that the way it's being archived? Why haven't they? I mean, if you have it digitized, it's not that hard nowadays. Technology to very quickly turn that into a transcript.
That's an excellent question. I do not know. As a matter of fact, I just talked to a buddy of mine today who's also very, very good friends with this guy. Wolf McCarran is his name. And there's never been a satisfactory explanation why they won't make that material available. Hey, look, The same thing with APRIL, okay, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. Both Jim and Coral Lorenzen have been dead for over 40 years, and all of their stuff is archived. I think it's family that has access to those archives, but it has not been made available either. So here are incredible, who knows what information might be in that would be invaluable for today, but there's no way to get to it.
It's very, it seems surreal to look at all this well archived material, access to it, yet not taking advantage of where I find it strange. The entire thing, I find it kind of a strange thing to put together.
Right.
You know, with all this AI now, I've been just paying a little attention to what's going on with it, because they've scraped everything they can from the internet already, all the information in English. And so they started scraping podcasts without permission and YouTube. But Google has a conflict in this, because they are also they own YouTube, and they also are developing their AI. And so they're also scraping. So they can't, but it could close the whole thing down. But what I'm getting at is they are out of, all these archives that can be digitalized. And I'm not just talking UFO archives. There's
Right.
so many archives that can be, digitized. And I know that, there is a lot of work in the UFO world as far as digitizing. Dave Marler. And I would suggest, if it's all right with you guys, I'd like to have him on our show sometime and talk about what he's been doing involving in getting, things out there so people can access them. The public can access them. I think it's very important.
But you bring
Sure.
up, that's a very interesting point you bring up, though, about using AI to rapidly, assimilate that. I mean, I have my concerns, because AI is human-created algorithms that are used to generate the machine learning aspect for it to go forward to do that. So it's hard to make it without a slant, but that doesn't mean that you can't have two kinds of AI to go through and then do the compare and contrast. Hopefully, there's the balance on that approach. But the information's sitting there. It's sort of like scrolls that you can read anymore. It's very interesting. And you look at the university. This is obviously a valued collection. I mean, this archive is of some importance to them, and I think McDonald's work is in total distinguished, and the different disciplines that he was involved in. I think one balances the other. I know the temptation for a lot of folks is to say, well, you have to probably look at his UFO studies or his UAP phenomenal studies, because he distinguished himself in the hard sciences. And I would go and say, well, I don't know if one needs the other. I think they both point to a very disciplined scientific approach in mind, and a record of achievement of doing that. And when someone like himself points to and says, we should pause and look at this and go, that's why I think they both work. I don't think you need one of that, but I'll take whatever gets the public interested to say, well, we probably ought to pay attention to this. But it's very sad to me, given the problems that he obviously had and other things that are going on. The man was beaten about the head and shoulders in a figurative way, doing good works, which is not the first time we're going to hear a tragic story like that. But I find it really tough.
Just to let you know, I've told people in the chat, if they would like to ask a question, to put them in all caps. And here's a general question here. Do you think any foreign powers are fishing through these UFO archives? I don't know I personally don't have any opinion on that. Have never really gave that any thought myself. Either one of you guys?
I've got no doubt that there are interested parties that are fishing. Hey, look, back in the late 40s, early 50s, all these reports emanating from the United States, the Soviets were sitting up publicly, they were laughing at the capitalists, but they were having their own encounters.
Right.
So you can bet Joe Stalin and his boys were doing everything they could do to find out anything they could find out about this phenomena, Commander.
I completely agree. So there obviously is some level of governmental, global governmental understanding, whatever that, I don't think it's a written down agreement, but however the different levels of agencies and individuals that represent governments get together to do that. And then it becomes like any other piece of information. You want to know what the other side knows. You want to know if maybe they have some advantage. Obviously, when you think about reverse engineering, you want to assess if that's going on, if that story. And then you have the aspect that you're able to use it as a tool, as a weapon, weaponizing it by putting stories into media, putting different things into action. I think every country has studied what the impact of if disclosure or if it's being said. And I think they've equally studied, what's the advantage of having it as part of entertainment? What's the advantage of using it as a scarecrow to divert attention or to try to control events or to divert? There's no doubt in my mind that they actively are looking to ascertain what the other side possibly has.
I would think it would go along the lines of, this is just speculation, but what do they know that we don't know?
Correct.
So
and if there was an agreement, what's the other party holding back? What did they bring in there? Now you take a fairly open society that the United States represents. This is a plum that you just cannot wait to get your hands on, right? And this is not just in UFO activity or UAP activity. This is in almost every part of it. And let's also be honest that we have people that are very susceptible.
Was that Alexa? Did I just hear Alexa?
Yeah, you did.
Quiet.
Very susceptible to being bribed or to allow for access. And that happens in all phases of our society, that you have people that are willing to give up everything from military industrial secrets to whatever to do that. So no.
Well, I gotta throw something out here, and I'm really interested in your responses to it. One thing that has proven to be a truism in almost the 75 years that the UFO phenomenon has been a public thing, okay? Not only a public thing, but talked about literally all over the planet. Almost every government out there, when it comes to this topic, is in lockstep with the U.S. government, which has been, we're going to say there's no such thing. And if you do see something, it's probably crap or it's a misidentification, Venus, whatever, okay? A satellite going over. Hell, I had a friend of mine about 5 or 6 months ago tell me one night he had gone out in his backyard to do something before, going in and turning on the boob tube, and something in the sky caught his eye, and he looked, and suddenly here was a cluster of little tiny bright lights floating down. And he said at first, my God, the breath caught in my throat until I started doing a little investigation. And it turned out to be those, what the hell do you call them,
Skylink?
guys?
Sky-
Yeah, those.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's getting everybody.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
It is
I got
pretty
it.
impressive. It's pretty impressive.
Go ahead.
I
have to say something right after this.
Yeah, sure. I hate to keep pounding my paper, but the disclosure document I wrote, I think there's got to be something to those final conclusions, because that is the one thing that I think would convince even unfriendly governments with the United States that if they were aware that there is some kind of conflict going on out there, they would want to keep this under vest and away from the public, because, hey, if that became known, providing it's true, all right, that would scare the hell out of everybody, gentlemen.
Yeah. Do you mind if I just bring this up, because I think this is interesting, because you're talking about a sighting. So I was on a music cruise for a week in the Caribbean, and I met a couple of the musicians, and this guy right here is the drummer for the Zombies, and the Zombies they were really fantastic. I can't believe one of them is like 83 and still singing, play keyboard and all that. But anyway, so this is Steve Rodford, and so I was having coffee, and I look over and I go, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" And we were talking, and he asked me what I did, and I said, I'm an art appraiser, antique appraiser, and all that. But I said, well, I also do a show on UFOs. And he went, "What? Are you kidding?" He said, "I've been talking to the band members about the first day we were out to sea." He said, "I'm out on the deck, and I'm all alone, and I'm looking out at the stars and everything." And he says, all of a sudden the star comes down, and then it shoots this way, and then it shoots back that way, and kept zigzagging, and then it shot off. And I said, "Whoa!" And he says that the band members told him not to really talk about it much. And
come on, it's a captive audience. They're going to show up for the show.
Yeah. So I said, "Hey, I do this show, and would you be on it?" And he took my email address. I hope to have him on the show.
That's pretty cool. That
was really fun. Yeah, it was a fun time. But anyway, getting back to, I can't remember where you were leaving it, Don, and I totally went a different tack.
Well, it's real simple. My conclusions, finally, what would be the reason that this would be considered a core secret wrapped in a special access program? This, whatever the ultimate secret is. Well, actually, I think there are two elements to it. Number one, and this is played out over the decades around the world, a lot of witnesses have reported seeing what appeared to be various UFOs in combat and out in space, STS-48, Phobos-2. These were actually two examples that I used. That would be a reason to keep this ultra secret if it were actually real. And I personally think it is. The second thing, and I've been toying with this on doing another paper about this aspect that would be kept secret, is, and we go back to Zecharia Sitchin, his original Sumerian investigations, his translation of ancient tablets, etc., with the imposition of aliens, the so-called Anunnaki, making their presence all around the globe, with the idea that originally they basically created modern Homo sapiens sapiens as a slave race that went on for hundreds of thousands of years. I don't know when it was they decided to leave. It might have been with the advent of the Younger Dryas event, when the ice caps melted, dissipated, and what have you, the chaos that created. But I've been doing a little research here and there, thinking I might do something on that. So
fascinating.
Well, I want to throw a quick one out to the audience. Jay Paul has put some outstanding remarks in the comments tonight, and I urge if Jay Paul has the opportunity, please drop me a line, Commander Cobra, KGRAdb at Gmail. Love to connect up. There's some pretty interesting remarks that Jay Paul's put out, and I agree with a great deal of it. So,
anything you want to address? No, I did mention to people in chat, if you have any questions, please put them in caps, and we'd love to have some questions from you. And because we are winding down, what do we have, about 15 minutes, something like that left done, right?
yeah, a little closer to.
Yeah, it looks like about 11 minutes actually.
So let's kind of round the table here. Body of work in my mind that McDonald produced in his scientific endeavors, which includes his study of UAP UFO phenomena of the time, I think withstands pretty stringent academic and scientific method standards. I think the body of the work that's there. I think when you look at some of the things that he pointed to that didn't make sense, you should put pause to a lot of folks. I am still, and I didn't really think about that we got together on the show tonight, perplexed with the handling of his archives and the handling of his information. You have access, but it's not easy access. And we live in an age where simple, easy access is the norm. It's the standard. So is there something there? Is there some kind of just using the weight of not putting the system to prevent that information coming out? Are they just hoping that this becomes a more obscure source and disappears?
Well, that's certainly possible, but not just with McDonald.
Oh no, that's what I'm
Also,
saying. And that's the last point I was going to make. I think the McDonald situation is a perfect depiction of this repeating cycle that goes on. You have scientific approach that goes forward on it, and then is trying to figure out how to make it work, how to make it better. It's followed by the government getting involved and say we're going to have studies and hearings, and then you end up with what we find now.
Well, with Condon and with the Arrow report, okay, hell, they're both sides of the same coin. All right? The way I see it, they're both sides of the same coin. So, and take Grouch now, David Grouch. He's been roundly castigated in many ways, similar to what they did to McDonald.
Sure.
Okay. Questioning his mental acuity, questioning for God's sake, the man was a United States Air Force officer. Now that doesn't give him shielding from everything, but he didn't reach that rank and the duties that he had to perform because he was a screw up, and he didn't go searching to be the person that's put in front of Congress. He was chosen, given clear guidelines, of course, but he was chosen. And what did it get him? Ultimately, what did it get him? Same thing with McDonald. What the hell did it get him? Nothing. And he ended up committing suicide. So, I don't know.
What do you think, Mark?
Well, we're talking about Grouch. There's a lot of criticism of him right now. I don't know if anyone has been paying attention, but there's a lot out there just saying he's, evading, talking to anyone. I've actually tried to get in touch with him through someone else, and he says he's basically working on something behind the scenes, is not doing any interviews at this point or anything like that. But I think, part of it might be because of the way he was treated, possibly. I'm not sure. But whenever anyone goes dark for a while, like Lou Elizondo or anyone, and Lou was writing his book, all of a sudden, everyone comes up with these theories. Oh, he's this or that. I mean, it's kind of funny to listen to, because there always seems to be, the reasoning is conspiratorial and not like for personal reasons or anything like that. A lot of times people just want to, cool off a bit and don't want it to be controlling their life when it does. I mean, think of how much in the limelight Grush was, for instance, and for a while, and that's a lot of pressure. And there's all these people contacting him constantly, and all these news stations constantly contacting him. And I don't think he did anything for money or anything like that. I mean, how much money has he made from all this? I mean, that's the first thing people say. Oh, he's in it for the money and all that. I don't think, I don't believe he was in any of this for fame or money.
Well, I'll tell you, they're both bullshit. Okay, fame and money. I've been in this thing for 36 years. All right. I've gone broke 1,000 times. All right. And fame, as far as fame, oh, there's Ecker. What a son of a bitch. So there you go. That's your fame and money.
Yeah.
The other part, Martin, you bring up is if you watch what happened to Major Lieutenant Colonel Grush, I still don't know what the final rank was on there. We've talked about it. I brought it up many times. Crowdsourcing information is a very standard technique now that's used by intelligence agencies because it doesn't require a lot of really clandestine work. You get a group of people who may or may not even have security clearances, and I'm sure they're being replaced by AI, where you just watch where is it going with the feeds, and things were purposely thrown into the internet. One of the famous example is the Pope announced today that he is going to travel from the Vatican to pick a country in the Muslim sphere. And they immediately now watch what happens on Facebooks and other social medias, and who's sending it, where's the attention. Now you have the ability to not only see what the activity is, but to see what people are saying. And then you can branch out from who said it and go backwards. So I have a feeling that many times when people like this show up, especially when they finally get to that spot where they're at Congress and they're testifying, that it's now with, Twitter, formerly known as X, formerly known as Twitter. I guess you have to say that as part of the trademark, and I wouldn't want KGRAdb to get in trouble because Commander Cobra doesn't do Twitter, or X known as formerly as what Twitter used to be called, or whatever part of it. I'm not very good on those social medias, but I do understand the power of what they have. But one of the other things that's incredibly telling is you can get almost an instant respiration of what a person is doing. Obviously, politicians are running on that. People that are branding are doing that. We all do it to some level when we check to see how the show's doing, or what's happening on a market. All of this is that part of it. I think when you look at Grush and he started to get some grit, that was getting some traction, that was causing people to, well, this is important stuff, and more people talked about it. I always get the feeling that somebody or a committee that's there go, okay, he's reached the point where we may not be able to control this. Now it's time to actively try to counterweight whatever it is that he's saying that's getting attention, and all these things spill out.
My friend, are dead on.
So, well, thank you. What a way to end the show.
Yeah.
If you want to make a lot of money in UAP research, if you want to make a little money, start out with a bigger pile. That was Don Ecker's first lesson. And like a broken clock, I'm right at least once a day, twice a day. Commander Cobra. I will go to bed tonight a happy man.
Yes.
Well, that's good.
Yes.
Well, I know the one thing that I'm hearing out there right now about Grush is either do I want to say Kirkpatrick or AARO or Grush is lying. One of the two is lying. Right. That they were trying to get in talk, together on this. And there's a lot of out there right now saying that Grush did not, show up when he was supposed to show up at AARO. I don't know if that's true or not.
Right.
I don't know. But
Grush has denied it.
Yeah, Grush has denied it. So one of them is lying. I don't know who it is.
Well, as we said,
the government would never lie to us, right?
That's correct. Obviously, now you're trying to keep me up. Now you're trying to give me a really bad night's sleep.
That's right.
Well, I got to say one thing before the show is over. And Grush, during his congressional testimony, stated that people have died as a result of the secrecy. Now, Chris DePerno and I, both former police officers, I was shocked that none of those boneheads in Congress followed up with Grush on this. I sure as hell would have. Gentlemen?
Well, unless you already have kind of an indication that is not a statement that provokes a lot of surprise.
Yeah, but most people in the public are nowhere near as knowledgeable about these things as what we are talking about it weekly, okay? I know if I were a citizen and I would have watched that and I had no knowledge about, other than the fact that people see things in the sky from time to time, you're telling me that people have been murdered? Why? What's the story? And there you go. Guys, we're out of time. I hate to say it, but once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. And Commander Cobra, Martin Willis, thank you so much. Chris, we hope you're going to be back next week. And if the good Lord is willing and the river don't rise, we'll see you in a week.
Thanks, audience.